it is with an enormous amount of pride I'd like to introduce you to Senator Cory Booker. You bet, absolutely.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Please sit down. Please sit down. I came here for about 3 reasons, and the first was to celebrate and thank you. And so I feel like I should be the one yelling and screaming and giving you all a standing ovation. The battles that we have won so far, over this 1 year, the battles to stop a craven, a heartless stripping back of the Affordable Care Act, the efforts to take away Medicaid expansion, the efforts to undermine the ground we have gained. The only reason that stopped wasn't because of people in Washington. It was because of grassroots leaders like you who fought, who marched, who protested, who posted online, who made phone calls. We saw incredible people, from little lobbyists to senior citizens, from veterans to teachers to parents, community leaders coming to Washington, activating and organizing. We are here at this moment, as precarious as it might seem, with the president that often shakes us to our core with his comments and his actions. But we are here standing today, having defended the Affordable Care Act because of the folks in this room and folks like you around this country. So I want to say thank you first and foremost. You all are hewn from a tradition in this country that knows that change never comes from Washington. Think about this for a second. The civil rights movement, the suffrage movement, workers' rights, environmental rights. We know that these weren't a bunch of senators sitting around. Strom Thurmond didn't just sit around and think to himself one day, well, you know, maybe I'll give those folks some civil rights. No. Change does not come from Washington. It comes to Washington by people demanding it. As Frederick Douglass says, power concedes nothing without a demand. And so understand that your activism, your fearlessness, your courage, your persistence, all of that is making a difference. And as I say that to you right now, I want to note one more time some of the gains that we have made. I'm the only senator in America right now that lives in an incredible community. We all do, I'm sure, but I live in a community where the census tract data shows that the median income in my household income in my community is $14,000. I live in a Black and Latino community. It's just rich with character and strength and love. I've lived there more or less for about 20 years. And every day I get up, I know what I'm fighting for when I'm home in Newark. My community, we know what the struggles are done. We know what the unfinished business of America is. But I'll tell you this, when the Affordable Care Act came, it had a dramatic impact. In a nation that boasts to be the wealthiest nation in the world, but we still have some of the worst health outcomes. It is this disconnect, this discordant note in our nation that just doesn't seem right. Why in the most wealthy nation in the world do we have the highest child poverty rates of all industrial nations? Why do we have the worst health outcomes in all industrial nations? But what we accomplished through the Affordable Care Act, and I want you all to know, I miss Obama. Hold on. I miss Obama, and I miss her husband, too. Michelle. The Affordable Care Act lowered the uninsured rate here in America dramatically. It cut the personal bankruptcy rates by 50%. It shrunk the uninsured rates because we still have persistent and painful disparities between blacks and Latinos and whites in this country in terms of health access and health outcomes. And for black and white children, it closed that gap dramatically. This is a piece of legislation just by expanding Medicaid in those states without governors who fell into the craven crevasses of petty politics and didn't expand Medicaid. But for those that did, it helped to get health care access to so many people. helped states like mine better battle the opioid crisis because it gave us resources to do so. I could go on and on about the gains, but there are times that we should savor the progress we've made. But we also have to know that we have so much more work to do. We live in a country that does not have the liberty and justice that should be in a nation like this that comes with every single person having access to quality health care. We still live in a nation, please. We still live in a nation where people make these awful decisions between buying their prescription drugs and paying rent or providing for meals for their family. We still live in a nation where we have these unbelievable realities. Our maternal death rate, women who die in childbirth, is higher than any other industrialized nation. And then the racial disparities within that are dramatic. Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die than white women in childbirth, and their children are twice as likely to die in childbirth. We have a nation where certain ethnic groups are in crisis. Native Americans, 40% of Native Americans who die from heart disease are literally under 65 years old, dying in their youth. We have so many data that should hang like a shame in a country that boasts such proud ideals, such proud values, and has so much wealth. We have got to get to be a point in this nation, like we have in this country with other gains that we've made. My prayer for all of us is that our children and grandchildren look back at this era today. They think to themselves, wow, look back at those times where people didn't have access to health care, they couldn't afford their prescription drugs. I want our children and grandchildren to look back on this time in the same way we do and look back on the right to vote in this country. Gosh, how could there have been a time in this nation where people didn't have the right to vote because of their gender? Or look back on civil rights. How can we have been a nation where people couldn't live where they wanted to or drink from water fountains just because of their color or their skin? We need to make this reality we are living in America right now something that future generations look back at and can't understand how that could have ever been. Because I want to tell you, fundamental to the American dream, fundamental to all the ideals we hail and we sing and we pledge, is this idea of universal health care. Let me explain what I mean by this, because you all know it. We can't stand and pledge allegiance to the flag and say those words, liberty and justice for all, if people in this country do not have access to health care just because they can't afford it. That is not justice. We cannot be a country that says we believe in life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. If people do not have access to health care, you cannot have life. You cannot have liberty. You cannot have the pursuit of happiness. Where is the liberty when you are chained to the fear of not knowing if one of your children gets sick or injured, whether you'll be able to afford to take care of them? Where is the liberty when you are constricted by terrible bills that are piling up because of the cost of prescription drugs? Where is the freedom when you are shackled by an illness because of its costs and your inability to get proper care? What I see on a daily basis in New Jersey and in the communities in which I live is an unfair, unjust shame upon the ideals that we sing. And this is what I want to get back to with all of us in this room. I want you to know that we come from a country with the greatest ideals at its founding. We are the oldest constitutional democracy on the planet Earth. We are a country that was founded by imperfect people who put forth genius into the planet Earth. And what I mean by the imperfections is I can't deny the fact that our founding documents were filled with the bigotries and the sexism of the time. Women weren't referred to at all in our founding documents. Native Americans in our Declaration of Independence were referred to as savages. Stokely Carmichael used to always say, "Constitute, constitute." I can only say 3/5 of the word, Stokely Carmichael used to say. But think about this for a second. What our founders did for us is they put forward these ideals that were so inspiring and so perfect that every successive generation of Americans would fight and struggle and sacrifice and make real on those ideals. Every generation would put some good measure of their belief and faith to manifest these principles. You know, Thomas Jefferson, when he wrote that Declaration of Independence, he ended it with this understanding that because we're not a country founded like others, we don't all pray alike, we don't all look alike, we all come from different places on the planet, because we don't have those bonds, those more shallow bonds of humanity, we have to make a special connection to each other. We have to pledge to each other a special commitment. And that commitment he wrote in those last words of the Declaration of Independence, in order to make these things happen, we must mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. That's what you all have shown so far. You've been willing to put forth that sacred honor, that commitment to one American to another that we need to get forward. It is this commitment of Americans who saw each other as their bond, saw each other as their harvest, saw each other as their responsibility. It's commitments of one American to another that helped us achieve extraordinary things. And here we are in this generation, looking back at people who fought so hard, who didn't sing our songs and make our slogans, they lived them. People who built the best infrastructure project in this country ever, called the Underground Railroad. They were living their commitment. People who sat in and marched knowing that they would get beaten. People who got on buses to do freedom rides knowing those buses would be bombed. They showed that sacred honor. People who somehow took us from sweatshops and child labor to workers' rights and universal public education, those people showed their sacred honor. They showed their commitment. It was Langston Hughes who talked about this idea of America, so powerful, so profound, but yet not real for so many people. He talked about the difference between saying your oath and living your oath. We know in this country, and I have a belief, a lot of religious folks, but I always say, before you tell me about your religion, first show it to me in how you treat other people. Now, I know we have a civic gospel as well. Don't tell me you're a patriot and disregard, demean, or degrade other Americans. Because patriotism means love of country, and you cannot love your country unless you love your countrymen and women. And love is not a feeling. Love is work. Love is service. Love is sacrifice to another American. And so Langston Hughes said this. In the end of one of his poems, he writes, "Oh, let America be America again, the land that never has been yet, but yet must be, the land where everyone is free, the poor man, the Indian, the Negro, me." And who made America? Whose sweat and blood, whose faith and pain, whose hand at the foundry, whose plow in the rain, must make our mighty dream live again. Oh yes, I say it plain, America never was America to me, but I swear this oath, America will be. And so now that is the oath. And now that is the oath that this generation must swear. Not with our hands over our hearts, but our hands extended to another American. Not with us standing for the Pledge of Allegiance or the national anthem, but us working and bending our backs to do what's necessary to pull, to drag, to push our country forward. We are the United States of America, the richest country on the planet Earth. Every American should be entitled to health care. Every American should be entitled to the security that comes from having access to quality, affordable care. That is our demand of this generation. Because health care is a civil right. Health care is a human right. And if we are to be a light unto nations, we can't preach a great civic gospel. We've got to live one. Now, I want to conclude by letting you all know the truth. I grew up with parents who were born in far more difficult circumstances than me. And I tell you, as my dad would tell me stories of his youth, the older I got, the more difficult his life had gotten when he was a child. I mean, he was born poor when I was a kid, but eventually he's like, boy, I wasn't born poor. I was born Po, P-O. I couldn't afford the other two letters. He grew up in the mountains of North Carolina, and he would start stories. By the time I got to my 30s, he'd be like, boy, when the tsunami hit my town. And I'm like, Dad, there's no way a tsunami hit your town. Don't you disrespect me, boy. Thou shalt honor thy mother and father. It happened a long time ago, before the internet. You can't look it up, but it happened. And my father, who was born to a single mom who couldn't take care of her, who got pulled in by patriots who understood that life is about taking care of folk. People that weren't even his blood took him into his home, raised him. No college tradition in my family. It was folk that got together in a community and made a way for him to college, literally even taking a collection in church to get him enough money to pay his first semester's tuition. And at North Carolina Central, a historically black college, might be an eagle or two over here. Then in college in the 60s, he watches and then participates in this civil rights movement where he watches blacks and whites, Christians and Jews putting themselves in horrific danger. The city movement started in Greensboro, North Carolina. A lot of North Carolina in here. And my father then comes to Washington, D.C., this town. And at the time, and I don't care what your background is, if you're Irish, if you're Jewish, if you're black, if you're a woman, there was a time corporate America probably didn't want you. And my father came here at that time. But it was the activism, the insistence, the demand of activists of all backgrounds here that got companies to start opening their doors. My dad eventually became the first black man hired by IBM as a salesman in the entire Virginia area. Then what happens when you lower barriers for entry and give people, everyone an opportunity, everyone does better. And my father succeeded. He was in the top 5% of the global salesmen, gets promoted to New Jersey. And then again, this is the late 60s, early 70s, goes to look for houses where they have great public schools, which happen to be in white neighborhoods. But every time they would show up at a house, they'd be told it was sold. And I want to tell you right now, my parents didn't give up. They found another group of patriots, blacks and whites who had joined together to create something called the Fair Housing Council. And in northern New Jersey, this small group of activists and some lawyers that were involved put out white couples to follow my parents around. When they were told this house was sold, the white couple would come and find the house still for sale. My parents fell in love with this house in the town I would grow up in, and they were told it was sold. The white couple shows up, finds the house still for sale. And they are so excited, and they put through as a proxy for the white couple puts a bid on the house, the bid is accepted, and on the day of the closing, the white couple doesn't show up to the real estate agent's house. My father does, and a volunteer lawyer named Marty Friedman. And they walk in. And they walk into the real estate agent's office, and the lawyer, Marty, confronts the real estate agent who doesn't capitulate, who doesn't surrender. Instead, he gets so angry, he gets up and punches my dad's lawyer in the face and sigs a dog on my dad. And every time my dad would tell the story, the dog would get bigger. So imagine me now. After all this legal problems, we move into this house. I was just a baby. I grow up in this community, and my dad is watching me grow up. By the time I'm 18 years old, I had so much 18-year-old swagger. I was on my way to Stanford University on a scholarship. I got into that college because of a 4.0, 1,600. 4.0 yards per carry, 1,600 receiving yards. I was a football player, and my dad is offended by me walking around this house even though he bought it. He's like, boy, don't you walk around this house like you hit a triple. You were born on third base. You drank deeply from wells of freedom and liberty and opportunity that you did not dig. You sit under the shade of trees that you didn't plant or cultivate. You eat from banquet tables prepared for you by your ancestors. And you cannot sit there and get dumb, fat, and happy consuming all of these blessings. You got an obligation. You can never pay back what your ancestors did for you, but you can pay it forward. And so I got to tell you right now, the end of the story is a little interesting. I get down here to Washington as a United States Senator, and my dad dies 6 days before I was elected. And it was a hole in my heart. My mom and I were grieving, even though it was this incredible day. And to fill the hole, my mom, in her brilliance, decided the last thing you're gonna do before you get sworn in is go see John Lewis. And so we sat with this man who is so humble, a titan in American history, but still's got his hands on the plow. And I tell you this, it was amazing. His office is incredible. It's like a civil rights museum, except for he's in every picture. And when we left there, my mom was on fire. I don't know if any United States senator in our history has walked to go get sworn in by a vice president and had a lecture from their mom the entire way. My mom was like, boy, please don't forget where you came from. Don't forget the blood, sweat, and tears that got you here. Don't forget that the title doesn't make the man. The man has got to make the title. And a year later, I'm starting to write a book, and I have to go back and fact check my family stories, which is difficult with my father. I need to find out, was it a dog or a pack of wolves? Because eventually my dad's like, I fought a pack of wolves to get you in this house. And so I have to track down the activists who helped my family move in. And I go to find, how can I find the head of the Fair Housing Council from the 1960s? Well, she was easy to find because she's still head of the Fair Housing Council today. 92 years old. And now she's not fighting for housing rights for blacks. It's usually same-sex couples or Muslim couples. But the fight for civil rights, a fight for human rights, has no color. It's a fight for justice. It's a fight for our ideals. And I bring her into my office when I find her, and I literally, no exaggeration, get on my knees before her and thank her for what she did. I'm embarrassed that I never said thank you. How many of us right here, right now, can think of people that we should say thank you to, teacher or coach, someone who made a difference in our lives? And I say to her, I've got to find the facts of this story. Can you confirm things? And she confirms a lot of things. And I said, well, I really want to meet this lawyer, Marty Friedman. And she says, well, I'm sorry, he's dead. And it was like a punch in my gut of shame that I never thanked a man who took a punch in his face for my family. But then she says to me, Cory, there's one man, though, that organized all of those lawyers. His name is Arthur Lessman. Find him. And I went and I found the man. I called him up. He was a judge now, but at the time in the 60s, he was just a struggling lawyer starting his business. And he told me the whole story. He confirmed it was not a pack of wolves. He confirmed a lot of things. And then I asked him, just a simple question, why would you leave your business? You're struggling. You're struggling economically. Why would you suddenly take so much time to help black families try to integrate your neighborhood? Why would you do this? And he says to me, I remember the moment I made the decision. And I said, why? And he said, I was sitting at home comfortably on my couch, watching TV, and suddenly the news broke in. And on the news was these people who started in Selma on a march. And the news was covering what happened to them on their way to Montgomery when they got stopped on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And here I am sitting comfortably in the suburbs of New Jersey, watching these activists standing up in resistance to injustice, standing up for our dream of this country bigger than we were. Standing up for the words I sang and the pledge I made, and I was comfortable on my couch. He understood at that moment that the opposite of justice is not injustice. It is inaction. It is silence. It is apathy. He understood then what Martin Luther King said, that what we have to repent for in this day and age is not the vitriolic words and violent actions of the bad people, but the appalling silence and inaction of the good people. And he said he got up from that couch and resolved himself that he would do something. He went to work, told his partner, we're going to Alabama, but they realized they couldn't afford the plane ticket. So they just sat there for a moment and said, basically, maybe we should just do the best we can with what we have where we are. And so they made calls. Who needs a little bit of pro bono time? They met Miss Lee Porter. And a few years later, they get a case file that says Cory and Carolyn Booker. I am standing here right now because of a power we all have. It is the only power that is truly transformative. It is the power at the center of the ideals of this nation. It is a power desperately needed now as much as ever. It's a power that Alice Walker talks about when she says the most common way people give up their power is not realizing they have it in the first place. Every one of us has this power. It's the power unleashed by marchers on a bridge who had no understanding at that point. As they failed to make it to their destination, but just by them standing up and exhibiting this power, they unleashed forces that leapt 1,000 miles and changed the heart of a guy on a couch in New Jersey who would then go and change the destiny of generations not yet born. That is our power. And that power, some people might call it patriotism. That power, some people might call it activism. That power, some people might call it resistance. But the power, put simply, is love. And now I call upon you, my brothers and sisters, to understand that we have come a mighty long way. We've hurt. We've cried. We've come up short. But there are people that still need us to not give up, to not grow tired, to not be weary. We may face forces that have the kind of earthly power of governments, but we have the soul power of love. We may face people that say what we're trying to do is impossible, but we know that human history is, and American history is, a perpetual testimony to the achievement of the impossible. We may have difficulties with Republican majorities. We may have difficulties with a man in the White House, but I tell you this, we have the power. The power of the people is always greater than the people in power. And now I tell you, and now I ask you with all of my heart not to concede to the ideals of inevitability. Martin Luther King did say the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. But it doesn't just bend. We have got to be the benders. We have got to be the people that get up every day and go to the work of bending the arc of our country. We have got to be the people that no matter what happened the day before, no matter how hurtful or painful or outraged we are, we've got to have that quiet courage that says, get up out of bed no matter what, get up off the couch no matter what, and show up another day. And I promise you there'll be battles won in this next 3 years and battles lost. But remember those marchers on Selma. They didn't reach their destination right away, but their mere standing up for righteousness and justice and love set forth shockwaves into history that transform generations yet to come. I promise you that we will be a nation with health care for all. I promise you that we will be a nation that lives up to our hopes and creed. I promise you that we will be a nation of liberty and justice for all. And the only key in making that promise real, the only thing we need is each other. If we stand together and fight together and love together, we will make real the words of a prophet spoken by a king that yes, justice will roll down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. Thank you.